How's it going, everybody? I wanted to engage with this Alex O'Connor, William Lane Craig conversation. Alex is asking an exegetical question about the Bible, and this question is an emotionally engaged one, and yet I felt like the answer that he got from William Lane Craig was neither exegetical nor emotionally engaged. It was a philosophical answer, which William Lane Craig is a philosopher, so no no shade there, but I felt like there was some pieces to this conversation that needed to be picked up and engaged with, so I'm glad you're with me. They're going to ask some specific questions about the biblical text, Deuteronomy, the book of Joshua, and yet I didn't feel like they spent enough time looking at the text itself. I felt like if William Lane Craig had a Bible sitting in front of him, this conversation would have gone a lot differently. So you let me know what you think. Here they go.
A life that breathes. Now, you have pointed out that God actually does say to drive them out. And
Right.
it does seem that after these military campaigns, there are still Canaanites who are alive. But yet
Right.
it does seem to me that, for instance, on the issue of driving out, if we look first at Deuteronomy, where God says, however, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving to you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. And then it lists a number of peoples, including the Canaanites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they teach you to follow detestable things, and so on. It says, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Destroy them completely. Now, it may be that the Israelites failed to do so, but it seems like the commandment is clear. Now, where it says to chase them out, we have in Joshua chapter 8, when Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all of the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. So it seems here that, yes, they were chased out, but the Israelites then chased after them once they'd been removed from the city, killed them out in the wilderness, turned around, came back, killed everyone else who was left in the city. And who would that have been? It would have been the women, the children, the disabled, etc. So it seems to me that even if we have, God saying that you just need to chase them out, and even if, they don't end up in practice all being killed, it still seems like this could be described as at least an attempted genocide against the Canaanites.
As with stuff like this, watch the whole video. This is sort of a companion. We're building dialogue on top of a dialogue that already exists. If you want the full context, obviously you can watch that video. Essentially, this is William Lane Craig's response. He acknowledges that this is a difficult question, and I think that is important, but we're going to unpack it a little bit more.
Convenient for him. Having said that, I think it's entirely understandable why one would be troubled by this. I remember when I first heard Philip Quinn, a philosopher at the University of Notre Dame, speak on divine command morality and these cases in the Old Testament. It made me feel terribly uncomfortable. I mean, it is very difficult. But as a philosopher, I'm required to say what I think about something, not how I feel about it. And when I dispassionately weigh metaethical theories about the sources of moral obligation and prohibition, I can't think of any other moral theory that better grounds objective moral values and duties than divine command morality.
And so you have this philosophical answer to a question that is emotionally charged and again exegetical, essentially, and that's okay. Like I have a lot of respect for William Lane Craig. I mean, he was very influential when I was searching out Christianity. I didn't grow up in the Christian church. I am a Christian, and I had a lot of questions. And the work that William Lane Craig has done is brilliant. In fact, his debate with Anthony Flew was one of the places where his work really influenced me. And yet, I think the dispassionate approach at the beginning is fine. You want to remain as objective as you possibly can. So you sort of remove emotions in that situation and look at it as objectively as you can. But then at some point, you sort of have to bring the emotions back into it and realize, people who hate God are looking for justification to hate God. And when you say things when you answer the question in a way, the way William Lane Craig did, you're sort of giving fuel for that fire. It's like, well, it doesn't seem like anybody was really bothered by this. It's like, yeah, except for the people that were, killed, those people. And Alex keeps bringing that up, and he keeps bringing up children, and he even uses the word abhorrent at one point, and to describe this. And so you realize that this is emotionally charged, and it needs an emotionally engaged answer. And so I'm going to attempt to kind of give that, but I need to unpack the exegetical question first. And so we're going to do that.
Well, not everybody's killed because they're given the opportunity to leave their land. They're given the opportunity to be driven out. It's only if they stay and resist that they get killed. And the way you just cash that out is by saying, so they had a decision and didn't have to die. It seems to me that, of course, you're going to understand this as something that God has commanded. So whatever the reason may be, it must be the morally right thing to do. However, from my perspective, what I'm seeing here is a foreign nation approaching the native inhabitants of land which they believe is their own, saying, you need to leave. And when they refuse, killing them and then saying, well, look, I gave you a choice, didn't I? Because you could have just left. I mean, that in other words, doesn't seem like much of a defense to me.
Yeah. Okay, so and this is where you sort of go back to the exegetical question: whose land is it? And the land was given to Abraham. He's from Ur, so he's not from this land that the Canaanites did possess. But it is interesting to see how God works this out. Abraham shows up. He's a wanderer in the desert. You can pick up Genesis 14, and you see that Abraham becomes a very powerful, even political ruler. I mean, he's got all kinds of people sort of working for him and even fights wars. There's this kind of crazy war, the Battle of Nine Kings, or I think that's how many. It's just like this really interesting story, and Melchizedek shows up, which is a podcast for another day. But you could see that Abraham was no small figure in the region as he sort of wanders around. And then you have Genesis 15, when God really does just sort of like promise this land to Abraham. And whether you think that that's fair or not, God is the creator of this world. It's his world, and we are the creation. And so I get it. That's maybe where there's a little bit of tension there. Was it fair for God to give Abraham land that the Canaanites were living in? Okay, so actually we'll pick it up in Genesis 15:13. God said to Abraham, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. This is Egypt. But I will also judge the nation will they serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they will return here. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. This is a really interesting passage. This is a really interesting passage that seems to indicate that God is waiting to remove the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. He's giving them time, lots of time, hundreds of years. And what's happening in that time seems to be this iniquity is building, this sin, this evil that's going on in this land is sort of building up. And William Lane Craig points this out. He keeps coming back to the fact that these are just evil people. They're really, really evil people. I mean, just so you know, they're really evil people. But I don't know that that helps the conversation so much. What needs to be said is that God has a lot of patience for these evil people. That it's not that, these were evil people and they had it coming. It's that why would a completely holy, completely just God be so patient with people who were involved in human sacrifice, the sacrifice of children, temple prostitution? They were evil people. And so the practices that were going on were horrible. women and children being mistreated. And you could compare that with the nation of Israel, where women and children have rights. There's some tension there too with the patriarchal society and our modern society. So I get that. This is not an easy conversation to be had, but I think, again, with Alex and William Lane Craig, it was just like, open up the Bible, would you? And really like unpack it. If you're going to ask an exegetical question and you're going to use that as a pretext to not believe in God, which is one of the most important questions that you have to answer in your life, whether or not God exists and how I orientate myself to that God, if that God does exist. And you're going to use this text as a reason to say, this is why I can't believe in the God of the Bible. Then open the text and really do your due diligence and study what's going on in full context. That's why you have to go back all the way to Genesis 15. You have to go back to the promise that God gave to Abraham and his descendants that would follow after him. So the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Wow, that's like amazing level of patience and that God is showing to this nation. Well, not only that, not only was there 400 years where God waited, where God had promised Abraham. Again, Abraham was not just one guy wandering in this region. He was kind of a political figure. The Amorites, the Canaanites, the people of that land knew about Abraham and knew what he had claimed, that he claimed that his God, Yahweh, had given him this land. And he backed up that claim by delivering Abraham from this major battle. Abraham basically goes in and rescues his cousin against other political powers of the time. So it's no small thing. The Amorites, the Canaanites, they would know this. They would know that Abraham was at least claiming that God had given him this land. Well, not only that, but even after the Exodus, the people of Israel that are becoming a nation wander in the desert for 40 years. So think about this. You have the Israelites leaving Egypt. They're wandering. Well, they go, whatever. So they go up here and they spy it out, right? These are the 12 spies that go in. And they're like, there's giants in the land. Again, talking about how evil these people are. You got to go, actually, for full context, go back to Genesis 6 and realize that there's some pretty nasty stuff going on in Genesis 6 that has been sort of transported, what's the word, has been carried on through the ages, and we sort of arrive here at this land of Canaan. The spies go in, they're like, yee. Well, 10 of them are like, we got to pump the brakes here. 2 of them are like, we can do this, God is with us. And God says, you know what, this generation is not ready. So you're going to wander down here for 40 years. That's knocking on the door of these Canaanites. They know that these are the people that are descendants of Abraham, who was claiming that God gave this land to him. There's tons of them. They just conquered at least a part of the Egyptian army, right? This God that is going before them wiped out the Egyptians. That's no small thing. They would have known about this. They would have known that they're circling in this area, waiting to come in. They're out here. They're crossing over, and it doesn't take long to exit. So that's another thing, like the patience of God here, 40 years of wandering, and yet anybody who would have picked up this story and said, you know what, I think there's something to this promise that God gave to Abraham. These Hebrews just beat Egypt, and they're knocking on our door. We should probably just exit this land. Now, again, there's more tension there. I get it. You're giving up your homeland. That's not an easy thing. And yet, God is still patient. Deuteronomy 20. This is actually part of the passage that Alex was quoting. He doesn't quote the full context, and Alex is a smart person. I'm assuming he reads texts in their context. So as he brings this up to William Lane Craig, as they engage in this conversation, Alex doesn't acknowledge the context of this passage. Why? Is he being disingenuous? I don't know. I don't know Alex that well. I've enjoyed his conversations with William Lane Craig in the past, but this seems a disingenuous move. Deuteronomy 20:10. When you approach the city to fight against it, you shall do what first? Offer terms of peace. So the patience of God is extended and extended and extended and extended. I think it's also interesting that they're fighting against a city. The command is not necessarily even against the people. If it agrees, talking about the people as a city, as a, as an entity. It's not again, God is not like, even here, calling individuals out for, I guess he kind of is. So if the city is willing to make peace with it. And all the people found in it shall become your forced labor, and you shall serve you. Okay, another point of tension here, and I get it. And William Lane Craig does a good job of acknowledging that this is not an easy thing to talk about. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. And there's G.K. Chesterton again to sort of save us, and maybe that was C.S. Lewis. I always mix up my Chesterton and my C.S. Lewis quotes, so that's why I always second guess myself. But anyway, there it is. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult. Here we are. This is difficult. God is basically saying, look, these people are going to become your forced labor. They're going to become your slaves. So there's context here again. This is like we're opening this kaleidoscope, and as we open it into other passages. And that is hard work. Doing the exegetical work is hard. But if you're going to ask the exegetical question, do the hard work to answer it from the exegetical context. What would it mean to be a slave of Israel? Well, it means you have rights. It means you are a servant. It means that there's a year of Jubilee where you can go free, or you can remain in your household if you want to. It also means that as a servant or a slave or a forced labor person in the nation of Israel, particularly for these women and these children of these Canaanite nations, your situation in life probably improves dramatically because you're not at risk of being part of a human sacrifice. You're not at risk of being raped. You're not at risk of having to become a temple prostitute. You have protection inside the nation of Israel as a slave. We don't like this. We're modern people. We're like, slavery is bad, and we just carte blanche, right? Well, again, a point of tension, and I acknowledge that tension. It's not easy. But in context, to be a woman or a child in one of these tribes or Canaanite nations would have been a very tenuous life. Being a slave, servant, forced labor inside the nation of Israel is, I'm going to go out there and say that their situation in life has improved. That would be my response. We could talk about this more in detail because I know that there's probably more nuance there, but there you go. Peace. Offer them peace. If they're willing to live in peace, offer them peace. Offer them a place in your nation as servants, as forced labor, as slaves, whatever you want to call it, however it makes sense to you. However, if it does not make peace, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And this is the command of God that Alex is leaving out conveniently, let's say. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and just say that he didn't do his due diligence, how he's then engaging with William Lane Craig, who, it's like, okay, I don't know. Or did he sort of trap William Lane Craig with this and not giving the context? I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but it seems like a trap. It's a trap. If it doesn't make peace but makes war against you, then you should besiege it. This is part of an ongoing question in Scripture. You see this with the Pharaoh. Pharaoh hardened his heart. But there's also passages where God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And what you get from the language and from the author wrestling with this reality, which is again difficult, is that God hardens who will be hardened. So Pharaoh was willing to be hardened, and God hardened his heart. So both Pharaoh and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So what is God doing in this passage? He's saying, if they will make war against you, make war against them. So it's a conditional statement. If they will be hardened, then I will harden them. If they will make war against you, you make war against them. It doesn't say, go out and kill innocent women and children. That's not what the text says. That's what Alex makes the text sound like it says, but it's just not what the text says. If these people, and who would go out against them in war? Men. It would be the men of war. It's not the women and children. Now, were women and children killed? Yes. And in fact, it's funny because he doesn't even bring up this passage, which I would have said is maybe even the hardest one, is actually in 1 Samuel 15, because that's where he actually talks about killing children. So maybe that's another podcast for another day. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to build on this. You never know when you get into this stuff. I'm like sitting down thinking, I just, I listened to the podcast. It sort of got under my skin a little bit. I felt like I had a few things to say. And yet now it is, I don't want to not give it the time and attention that it deserves. Now that I've opened the can, I don't want to just be like, here's my quick and easy answer, because there isn't a quick and easy answer. And so you can see this is the passage that Alex is quoting. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not the cities of these nations nearby. Okay, only the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes. Yeah, that sounds horrible. Now, that's verse 16. We're 4 verses away from the context that we're just talking about. I don't think Alex missed this because he wasn't doing his due diligence. It's staring him in the face, so he chose not to bring it up. And unfortunately, William Lane Craig doesn't have the Bible sitting in front of him. He's approaching this question as a philosopher and not as an exegete. And I think sometimes you gotta just go, well, okay, you're asking a question about the text. Let's go to the text. And unfortunately, again, as a philosopher, sort of looks at it sort of dispassionately. So that's the Deuteronomy passage. The Joshua one is harder to let Alex off the hook on. This is Joshua chapter 8. This is the passage that Alex quotes, and this is God instructing Israel on how to take the city of Ai, the city. He commanded them saying, see that you're going to ambush the city from behind. That's what you're going to do. He did this with Jericho. He said, this is how you need to take the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. Then I and all the people who are with you will approach the city, and when they come out to meet us at the first, we will flee before them. Who's that? That's the people of Israel. They will come out after us, and we draw them away from the city, for they shall say, they are fleeing before us. And at first, so we will flee before them. And you shall raise from your ambush and take possession of the city. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hands. Then it will be, now again, Joshua 8 has to be read in the context of Deuteronomy 20. If the people in the city will make peace with you, make peace with them. Okay? We can't remove the two things. So take possession of the city. What does that mean? Does that mean go into this city and slaughter all the women and children and the disabled, like Alex is saying? No. Take possession of the city in the context of Deuteronomy 20 means go into the city, and those who will make peace with you, make peace with them. Those who will war against you, war against them. So if women and children and disabled people are up there going, hey, we give up, cool, come on into the nation of Israel. You have to come in as a forced labor, but you can come into the nation of Israel. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. Then it will be when you've seized the city that you shall set fire to it, and you shall do it according to the word of the Lord who has commanded you. So Joshua sent them away, and then when they went to the place for the ambush and remained between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. All right, now Joshua rose early in the morning, mustered the people, and went up to the elders of Israel before the people of Ai. Then all the people of war, women and children, no, people of war, who were with them, went up, drew near, and arrived in front of the city and camped to the north of Ai. And there was a valley between Ai. And they took about 5,000 men. Okay, of course, this is Israel I'm talking about, but you could see that it's men engaging in this. So they stationed the people, and all their army was on the north side. Okay, you get the idea. They're setting up an ambush. It came about when the king of Ai, is that a woman and child? No. Saw it, that the men of the city hurried and rose up early and went out to meet Israel in battle. And all his people at the appointed time, people at the appointed place before the desert plain, but he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. And I'm sorry I'm reading from the NASB, which does trip me up a little bit, so hopefully you're hanging in there with me. I appreciate it. Okay. Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled. Okay, so you get the picture. City, Joshua is fleeing so that the people in the city come out of the city and follow him. Because Israel is it is at a disadvantage because they're trying to take a city. Cities were difficult to take. So they drew them out in this sort of feign. And they fled by way of the wilderness. So now you have Israel going into the wilderness. So you see that. Israel flees, the people of the city follow Israel into the wilderness. And all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. And they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Who are they that pursued them? The people of Ai, the men of war of Ai. They pursued Joshua. So not a man was left in Ai, not a man, all right, who had gone out after Israel. And they left the city unguarded and pursued Israel. Okay, so the Lord God says to Joshua, stretch out your hand. Okay, and this is where Alex picks up the tale. Now, when Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field, in the wilderness, where they had pursued them. A text without a context becomes a pretext, right? Who is they? Now, Alex basically says that Israel pursues Ai out into the wilderness to slaughter them, which is a direct contradiction to what the text actually says. It is not Israel pursuing Ai into the wilderness. It's the men of Ai pursuing Israel into the wilderness where they had feigned and retreated to draw them out of the city. Alex is a smart person. I'm assuming reads a text in context. He knew that that's what was happening, and unfortunately tricks William Lane Craig or traps him in this, counting on the fact that William Lane Craig wouldn't just look at the text, and unfortunately he doesn't. And so now we have, and again, if this is the reason that you don't want to believe in the God of Israel, because the God of Israel is this genocidal God, which is the claim that Richard Dawkins throws out as why he doesn't want to debate William Lane Craig. So they make these really grandiose statements based off of the interpretation that they're making of a biblical text, that they say is God commanding this horrible genocide and all this stuff. It's like God commanded Israel to take the land. He gave the inhabitants of Canaan 400 years to repent. After Abraham had wandered, Abraham basically saying, hey, my God, Yahweh, the God Most High, has given me this land, and that message went out. 400 years that they had to repent and say, well, it seems like this land was given by God Most High to this particular people, and we should dip. We should just get out of here, or serve those people. And then even as those people were knocking on the door, he gives them 40 more years. And even as Israel engages in war, they engage in war under the command of peace that God gave them in Deuteronomy 20. Does that mean that women and children weren't killed? No, most certainly women and children were killed. But it doesn't seem that God is dispassionate about this subject. And I don't think we should be either as Christians. God seems to be waiting and waiting and waiting, drawing people out to repentance, to serve him in harmony. It's like God knows that the greatest joy that we have in this life is to worship him in harmony. And the greatest evil is what is going on in Canaan at this time. And yet God is patient. Now, William Lane Craig is getting wrecked because he persists in defending his philosophical position, divine command morality. And essentially at the end here says he doesn't have a problem with the killing of these children. I have a problem with the killing of the children. I'm sure God has a problem with the killing of the children. God has a plan, though. Why did these kids die? Why do any kids die? Kids die because we live in a fallen world, broken and horrible, filled with evil. Well, why doesn't God do something then? Why doesn't God do something for these children? And I guess my answer is God has done something. God has done the one thing that we needed him to do. He's willing to give up his own son, his own child, so that we don't have to live in a world of evil separated from our Creator. But we could live a life of worship in harmony to our Creator. Now, William Lane Craig basically says it doesn't matter because these kids go to heaven. But of course, to the atheist who hates God, that's horrible. That sounds horrible. Because they don't like God. They don't want to spend eternity in heaven with God. And I think that's where we often will make the mistake. If we haven't pointed people to Jesus, then we've lost the conversation. And I love William Lane Craig. I think he's a brilliant man and has helped me in my life. But he came defending divine command morality as a philosophical position. And I didn't pick up enough of him just pointing people to Jesus. Alex, and that's the bridge, because Alex is in the position of saying the lives of these children are important and we need to not overlook that, and he is 100% correct. We need to look hard at this really painful question and ask ourselves, has God done something to answer this question? Not philosophically, not even religiously, but has he entered into the problem to answer it for us? And that's the Christian answer to the problem of evil, to this conquest of Canaan. The answer is resolved as we look into the face of Christ. Is that easy? No, it's hard. It's hard. But I can't be emotionally withdrawn from this question because Alex is not asking the question from an emotionally withdrawn place. And I have to feel that. And I have to allow that emotion to lead me to Jesus. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Does the problem that I see in front of me lead me to a sufficient answer? Is the sufficient answer at the foot of Jesus, at the feet of Jesus? Yeah, I think so. Now, of course, I'm a Christian, so I might have a blind spot there. But the fact that the answer that the God of the universe gives is not a philosophical answer or a religious answer, but a person. And not just any person, but a person who is familiar with our sufferings. This whole conquest of Canaan is pointing us to something bigger. As big as it is, and as hard as it is, it's actually pointing us to something greater. And the author of Hebrews picks up on that. Hebrews chapter 4. Again, there's a way, and you could read the Bible as one book that communicates to it. All these different passages communicate to each other. He's talking about rest and entering into rest and entering into his inheritance. If Joshua and the conquest of Canaan had given them rest, if the promised land was the end in and of itself, he would not have spoken of another day after that. A greater rest and a greater promise and a greater place to be. Now, this is what William Lane Craig is gesturing to. He's saying these children, though they died, were brought into heaven. Again, as an person and I came as an atheist into Christianity. It sounds horrible because an atheist concept of heaven sucks. But a place of rest, a place of belonging, a place to call your own, this heavenly city, this new Jerusalem, this Eden. It's not the promised land that God gave to Israel. The promised land that God gave to Israel is pointing to another day after that, a better place. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his work. Where do you enter into your rest? You enter into your rest in the person of Christ. God did as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest so that no one will fall. Through following the same example of disobedience. Don't fall into the disobedience of the land of Canaan. Don't fall into the disobedience of Genesis chapter 6, Genesis chapter 4, Genesis chapter 3. Don't fall into that pattern of the world. Enter into a new pattern. The temple is modeled after this. There's a pattern of the temple that goes back to Eden. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than a two-edged sword, and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit in both joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to his eyes of him with whom we have to do. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted with all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Is this a difficult question? Yeah. I'm tempted to use stronger language. It's difficult. But is the answer that God has supplied not just even in my mind sufficient to come into contact with a difficult question, but greater than the pain and the suffering that that question provokes in us? The rest and the comfort is greater. The glory is not the suffering is not worthy of being compared to the glory. He entered into this problem as the great high priest who sympathizes with our weakness. One who has been tempted in all things, just as we are, yet without sin. Perfect. He stays perfect. He remains perfect. Where we could not. The Canaanites could not. Even the Israelites were not. It's all pointing to something greater. I think, unfortunately, if we disengage the emotional content from the question, then we're left with just a philosophical answer. And I think that's one of the things that bothered me about this conversation. As much as I love and respect William Lane Craig, and this is what motivated me to engage with the conversation, is it just felt like there was so much more that could be said that unfortunately was not said. Because it's not a philosophical question. There's philosophical elements to the question, but it's an exegetical question. And it's a moral question that provokes a lot of emotion. And I think, for me, that leads me to the person of Christ, who entered into this problem for us. So this went a lot longer than I thought. So thank you for being with me. Love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, I'm bringing the emotion that I have to the table. So hopefully that didn't provoke emotion without resolving it. For me, there's a lot of peace through that conflict that I have internally. I hope that peace resides in you as well.